Okay, the licensing board is now back in session. We are going to turn to contention number 2 and ask a few questions about it. I think we don't have quite as many questions, but as I understand it and read contention 2, it has a number of parts to it that have perhaps some similar themes, but I believe they're different parts. And so, well, maybe we'll ask Mr. Lutz a question about, contention 2, part 1, shall I call it, and then maybe ask Mr. France or Mr. Roth to respond to contention 2, part 1. And so that's one approach. Now, as I understand, petition at page 9, paragraph 17, raises as a contention a concern that the proposed license amendment involves a reduction in the steam generator level from 25% to 20%. In the meantime, Mr. Lutz, Edison said, no, there's no change occurring to this at all. The current tech spec is 20%, and the license as it would be amended is going to stay at 20%. That seems, do you agree with that? Mr. Lutz?
No, the way I...
License provision is not being changed.
No, I disagree with that. The actual markup of the document shows that it is changing the figure from 25% to 20%. That's the actual markup in the document saying what it's changing from and to. So this is a proposed change to the document, and it is
okay. Let me just focus then, Mr. France. I'd like you, could you explain your position as to whether it's a change or not?
Judge Carlin, is it okay if Mr. Burdick addresses this contention?
No.
Okay.
We don't want to triple team Mr. Lutz here.
That's fine. I'm happy to address this. What Mr. Lutz is referring to is a markup not of our current tech specs, but instead the improved standard tech specs. We provided 2 different markups, and he's referring to the markup of the improved standard tech specs. And that, in fact, does show a change from 25 to 20. So if you look at the current tech specs are not being changed. It's 20 in both.
So what's the current tech spec is 20?
That's correct.
And there is this thing called the improved standard tech specs, right?
That's correct.
And that's some generic document out there somewhere, right?
That's correct.
And that improved standard tech spec document has in it the number 25.
That's correct.
And you're saying, in our current specs, it's 20. So we're going to take this improved standard tech spec document that's got 25, and we're going to insert 20 to keep it consistent with our current tech specs.
That's correct.
Mr. Lutz, can you respond to that? Go ahead, Mr.
Yeah.
Okay, so the improved standard tech specs are something that the NRC staff agreed to previously as a generic document or generic. Okay, so in order for you to incorporate your current tech specs into that format, you have to make changes to the document that the staff has agreed to make it consistent with what your plant licensing basis is. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Mr. Lutz, that seems to make sense to me. They're not changing it. The current tech spec is 20, the proposed tech spec is 20.
Okay, well, the problem is that it's inconsistent with all the other references to the requirements for the steam generator water level. On page 124, it changes it from 25 to greater than 25 to greater than or equal to 50% with parenthesized wide range. And then on page 128, it goes from 25% to greater than or equal to 50%. On page 55, it goes from 25% to 50%. On page 162, it's the same as I just mentioned. Page 190, basically the same, 25 to 50,
Okay.
190.
Mr. Lutz, we got you. And Mr. France, what's your response to that?
In general, there are two different provisions. One that deals with the level that results in a reactor trip, and that's the 20% level. The 50% level is the level that's applied to some of the non-power modes of operation and are required to be there for core cooling during shutdown conditions. So it's a different type of provision in question. One pertains to operation at power, which is the 20% level, and then the 50% level pertains to the other modes of operation.
Right, so you're saying these are two totally different set points. One is currently set at 50%, the other is currently set at 20%. Those same two numbers are reflected in the improved tech specs, and there is no inconsistency, there is no typographical errors, that the equating of the 20% and the 50% is a misunderstanding of the technical design of the plant.
In the case of the 15%, I think the improved tech specs have a 25%, and so we're going from 25 to 50% there.
It appears that the placeholder for the level in these improved tech specs seems to be a 25% number generically across the board. I don't know why they did that, and quite often they use a star asterisk or something and says, you know, place your number in here. But they chose to go with 25% as a placeholder, which obviously has caused a lot of confusion for Mr. Lutz.
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay, well, perhaps we could turn to the, well, but Mr. Roth, I don't want to let you out of this thing. Do you have anything, how do you see what's going on here with the 20 and the 25%?
Thank you, Your Honors. David Roth for the staff. I think the easiest way for Your Honors to see what is or is not being changed is to look at Attachment 1, Volume 6, page 12 of 599 of the application. That actually has the reactor protection system instrumentation. It shows the trip points. The licensee is marked it up to indicate what changes they're making. And significantly on that, you'll notice no changes to the set points where Mr. Lutz believes there were changes. And the staff apologizes for any confusion caused by the placeholders.
Okay, that was volume 6?
Yeah, of the application. It's Attachment 1, Volume 6. It's Section 3.3 of the tech specs, the instrumentation section. And it's Table 3.3.1-1, which extends across about 4 pages because of how it's marked up.
And what pages were those on?
That would be page 12 of 599 of the application. And the tech specs and the little numbers, the tech spec currently is 3.3 or page 3.3-8 and page 3.3-9.
Okay, let's turn, I think this is a similar problem that may appear in some of the other portions with regard to what I will call the second part of contention 2, which is petition 10, paragraphs 18 through 21. That, as I understand it, Mr. Lutz, focuses on the pressure boundary leakage provisions, and you're concerned and allege that they are not consistent and there's a problem there. Southern California Edison answers at 30 and 31, and their answer says, no, those aren't being changed. Again, are they being, is it your position, I mean, have you read what they said, and do you still contend that these provisions on pressure boundary leakage are being changed? They may be consistent, they may be not consistent, I don't know, but if they aren't being changed, we probably don't have, it's not within the scope of this license proceeding to deal with it. But so are they being changed?
Okay, so are you asking me the question? If I can just say that hopefully what we're deciding here, if these are contentions and we're not actually trying to decide whether they're correct or not. And so this first contention had to do with the license. It's a very specific detail that I am contending, and I still submit that it's a valid contention, and I therefore request a hearing on it. Moving on to item number 2 then, the steam the pressure boundary leakage is, okay, so the question you're asking me is, since they didn't make a change to the license, is it therefore okay for me to make a comment on it? And I would submit to you that the public has the right to comment on any inconsistency within the license at all. It doesn't matter if they decided that they want to change it or not. They're saying they're submitting this new license, which they've made a lot of revisions to, for approval. And the public can come in and say, well, we don't think that this makes any sense. And I still believe that we have the right to do that, regardless of their assertion that the scope is restricted so much that I can only talk about the very small changes that they've made. In the first issue, there is an inconsistency between moving everything up from 25 to 50 and moving this one down to 20. It may be okay.
Okay, well,
but this is an inconsistency that...
Let me interject. I mean, this board has to comply with the law to, you know, and as I understand it, licenses for nuclear power plants contain many, many provisions in them, hundreds of provisions in them, and occasionally a licensee will come in and ask for some amendments to some specific provision of that license. And when they do so, as in this case, there will be an opportunity for the public to challenge the change that is being requested and file a contention. Now, every time you amend one provision of a license with 1,000 provisions, you do not reopen for challenge all other 999 issues. You can file a comment all you want, but in order to get an admissible contention, it has to be within the scope of the proposed license amendment, and there's binding case law on us that if it's not being changed, then it's not within the scope as required by 2.309 F1.
Okay, well,
So
the changes that are being made refer to checking the leakage. So there's a surveillance frequency change. They're taking the surveillance out, and they've got the surveillance requirement in. So they're changing a provision in this license. Therefore, that provision is up for discussion. Am I wrong?
The specific change may be up for the specific change is up for challenge. Everything else is not within the scope.
So you're saying that if there's a
If there's no change, then I don't see how it's in the scope.
Okay, well, I still assert that this is a severe problem. I know that in the recent public hearing that we had, the licensee said that they were able to detect leakage down to only 5% or 5 gallons per day rate instead of 150. The whole containment building is set up so that there's no leakage, and yet they have this big problem where they allow 150 gallons per day to leak out of the steam generator. So there's a big problem with consistency here. This is a problem that I, representing the public, am concerned about with this document. This is a proceeding with this license on the table, and I want this thing addressed.
Well, okay, thank you. I mean, there is another proceeding out there, a different board, dealing with different issues. I'm not sure whether your issues fit into that proceeding or not. But let's turn to another part of contention number 2, which I think illustrates the same difficulty here, which is the part of petition on page 14 of your petition, paragraphs 23 through 30. There you're concerned about the exclusion area. Apparently, Interstate 5 penetrates the exclusion area. It goes quite through the exclusion area, and you're contending that the company needs to install gates and turnarounds on Interstate 5, and there's also public beach signage issues because they're also in the exclusion area. The staff tells us that this very issue was litigated back in 1974 when this license was originally issued. There's nothing in this proposed change, is there, that's changing anything about the exclusion area? Is there?
Not that I could see, but I would like to say that if you're ruling that the exclusion area can be violated with a big freeway going through it and a publicly accessible beach, then the calculations that are made for emissions from the plant need to be adjusted accordingly so that so that they're actually reflecting the exposure to the public instead of the hypothetical exclusion area that doesn't exist. So indeed, there are concerns from the public here, and I know you've got this thing. I know you've got this.
We're not ruling that. All we're saying is this issue was raised before, and in order for a contention to be admissible, it has to be within the scope of the proposed license amendment. And if the license amendment doesn't propose any change related to that point, then it's difficult to see how it's within the scope. And that's the law we have to operate with. And maybe over another, there is another provision, and Mr. Roth alluded to it earlier, which is 10 CFR 2.206, I believe, which is a petition process where you can file a petition with the NRC staff, not with us judges, but with the staff, saying we think there's a problem with the existing license and we think you need to fix it because this is problematic or this is illegal or this is inconsistent. And the staff will take it and study it, and I can't speak to whether you'll get the relief you want, but there is that process that is always alluded to, and we're not ruling here one way or the other whether it's within the scope, but we are trying to find out whether there's a change going on, and it's my understanding, Mr. France, if you would address that, is there any change in the technical specifications that deal with the directly or indirectly with the exclusion area?
No.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, we skipped over atmospheric dump valves.
Atmospheric dump valve.
Yeah. I guess I'd like to ask a question regarding those to Mr. Franz. Are the atmospheric dump valves a safety grade component?
Yes, they are.
And they are a safety grade component, and they are in the tech specs.
That's correct.
And the operability of a steam generator requires one atmospheric dump valve to be operable on. There is only one per steam generator, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, if you were to operate this plant with in a situation where both steam generators are operable, meaning both steam generators have operable ADVs, and somewhere along the line that ADV fails during power operation, and you were to have an event, or let me say it this way, would there be some accident that would occur that would not have occurred had the ADV been operable?
Theoretically, I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to, but theoretically you might have an inoperable ADV where it's stuck open, and when it should not be open, that would be an event that would be an accident.
The ADV would release secondary side water, not primary side water.
That's correct.
So you would consider that an accident, or would you consider that a cool down transient?
Accident or a transient. I didn't want to try to characterize it.
It would be characterized as a cool down transient.
Yes.
Well within the design basis of the plant. I was trying to address the statement made by Mr. Lutz regarding the introduction of an accident if the ADV fails. And I just wanted to understand if that were in fact the case. Now, if the ADV were operable and then got stuck open, there wouldn't be any question that the reactor operators would know that the ADV was stuck open. They'd be in a cool down event. They'd have to deal with it. It's within the design basis of the plant. If the ADV were failed.
Is there a question in there?
You testified a little while ago.
Mr. Francis is nodding his head yes.
That's correct.
Now, my question dealt with operability of the steam generator requires the single ADV to be operable. Plant cannot start up, go into mode 2 and then mode 1 without an ADV operable.
That's correct.
On each steam generator. And if somewhere along the line the ADV fails such that if it were tested it would not work, is that a safety issue?
I believe we'd be in an action statement then and have to take action within the specified period of time in the tech specs.
Assuming you knew about it.
Well, again, as you indicate, if you have an open ADV, it's going to be very...
I'm not talking about an open ADV. I'm talking about an ADV that simply doesn't...
Oh, okay. There may be a latent defect in there that you would not know. That's true of any component in the plant.
All right, perhaps I'm asking a question that requires a detailed knowledge of the transient exit analysis of the plant. Nothing, I just looked at the FSR, I didn't see anything at all.
To give you an example, the plant is designed, and this is a design basis accident, for a break of the main steam line. A break or open ADV is going to be less severe than a break of the main steam line.
Yes.
Okay, on the atmospheric dump valve portion of contention number 2, I have a couple questions for Mr. France that may help me. Again, I'm struggling to figure out whether there's a change in the tech specs that is occurring or not. You, on page 34 of your answer, Mr. France, you assure us that it says, COPS implies that SCE is reducing the number of ADVs as a part of the law. Now, so the reality is there's one ADV per steam generator, is that right?
That's correct.
Currently, physically, that's the reality, one ADV.
And that's your current licensing base.
That's my question. Is that is that what the license says?
That's what the license says also.
Okay, so at first I thought, well, the reality is there's only one ADV, but the current tech spec says there's got to be 2, and you're bringing the current tech spec into conformance with reality. That's wrong, is that right?
That you're correct. What's happening, and I think
the current tech spec says 1 ADV.
That's correct.
There is 1 ADV.
No, that's right.
The proposed tech spec says 1 ADV.
That's correct.
There is no change.
That's correct. Again, this is a case where the improved standard tech specs have 2 ADVs per steam generator, and we marked that up to show 1, which is the current licensing basis, both physically in the plant and the current tech specs.
So this is a situation where the placeholder in the approved tech specs said 2 ADVs.
That's correct.
Which really should have been, again, something other than that. Should have said just question mark or something.
And in a sense, this is one of those where you're not using the standard tech spec.
That's correct.
But you're not changing the current tech spec, because the current tech spec is 1, the proposed tech spec will be 1.
That's correct.
Mr. Lutz, does that?
I have no further.
Think that's logical.
I have no further comment on this issue. Move to the next issue.
All right. Anything else? Okay. We have no questions with regard to contention number 3. We read the briefs. We studied them. We think we understand it. We may be wrong, but we think we understand it. And so we don't have any questions for the any of the parties on that. Therefore, we can move to closing statements, please. And therefore, we would begin with you, Mr. Lutz, 5 minutes closing statement, sir.
Okay, thank you very much, and I want to again thank everybody here with all of your courtesy and willingness to do this oral arguments and letting me speak. I would like to continue to assert that that we improve the visibility of these technical specifications for review by the public. I know that there's been a trend to move everything into these licensee controlled documents. This is a trend I think that has to be reversed. We need to have more transparency as illustrated by the recent executive order, and I hope that the NRC actually will comply with the executive orders from the President, the leader of the country, and start to move toward more transparency and put the brakes on putting everything in control of the licensee. And the reason that we're become very, very concerned about this is because of the recent events here and in Fukushima, where we enable the licensee to do whatever they want, and they end up blowing it pretty bad. And we want to see more transparency, and I think that will probably fix things so that we don't have to lose so much money and so forth in this recent event. So I think that we've covered the things pretty well, and I want to thank everybody for doing so. I don't really have any further detail here, and I know everybody is looking at their watches and so forth, so I'd like to close with that. But I would like the option, if there is one, if there's further questions, that I be able to answer them in writing. Because I am a neophyte to the process, I didn't provide everything as much detail perhaps up front. But if there are some more questions, I'm happy to go through and review any documents that you have. I would like to say one further thing, though, before I conclude, and that is in the references that were made in the CLI 0124, they referred to the start of this whole process when they started moving things into the licensee controlled documents, and they refer to a congressional request, they say, to the NRC that says, we would like you to change your hearing process. And there was a House Resolution 177, which it refers to, which is a resolution calling for the development and implementation of a United States nuclear non-proliferation policy. This went to committee and was never approved. And so referring to that in CLI 01-24, I think was inappropriate unless, and also there's other documents that were referred to in that one that you referenced to me that aren't even available in Atom. So it was very difficult to get, to do my research in terms of getting actually those documents out. And I will refer to this I did get only a reference to it. Where is it? Well, I don't have to do it in detail, but basically the idea is that's a very old trend that has started, and it's a new day. It's a new day. We need to open this up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lutz. Mr. France, 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you, Judge Carlin. It seems to be the position of Mr. Lutz that once the provision's in the text spec, it can never be removed. And that's just flatly inconsistent with the Commission's 1993 policy statement, which explicitly encourages licensees to remove unnecessary details from the technical specifications. And the reason that's in place is because if you have too many details, then the resources of the NRC staff and the licensee are unnecessarily devoted to changing that rather than focusing on more important safety issues. And so it's been the trend for the last 20 years, in accordance with the policy statement, to remove these unnecessary details from the text specs and instead have the text specs focus on what's truly safety significant. Mr. Lutz also said that we can basically avoid any violation at all in terms of meeting our text spec frequency just by changing it over time. Well, that's simply not true. If we miss a surveillance frequency in our surveillance frequency control program, that's a violation. If we, after the fact, change the frequency, that does not obviate the fact that we still have a violation initially. We can't, after the fact, change the frequency to avoid a violation. He also mentioned that he should be allowed to raise a contention, even if the contention is incorrect. And although I recognize the board is not here to judge the technical merits of the contention, if the contention mischaracterizes our application, and that's certainly what contention 2 does, the board is not required to have a hearing. The board can simply look at the application and determine that it's been mischaracterized and reject the contention accordingly, and we certainly urge the board to do so. And then, frankly, if you look at other issues that have not been addressed in detail today, issues on standing, issues on timeliness, again, even apart from the contentions, we believe the petition is deficient on those grounds and should be rejected. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. France. Mr. Roth. Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Mr. Mullen. Is it?
This is Mr. Lindell for the NRC staff.
Yes.
This pre-hearing conference is about a fairly narrow issue, and that is the admissibility of COPS's actual contention. Did they meet their burden in submitting an adequately supported contention that raises a material, genuine dispute with the application? It is not a general forum to talk about the merits of public oversight, nor is it the place to raise new arguments. It is not for the board, or for the parties for that matter, to craft a contention. The burden is on the petitioner to submit a petition by the deadline specified, to show standing, and to submit a contention that meets the regulations of 2.309 F1. In this case, the petition to intervene was filed after the deadline, and no good cause was demonstrated. Moreover, COPS does not have standing. They demonstrate no injury in fact stemming from the challenged license amendment. Now, although on reply, the COPS raised a new argument with, that they would lose hearing rights, and it is true the Commission has held in the Perry decision that standing is appropriate when there is a loss of hearing rights. Nevertheless, in Perry, the reason the Commission allowed standing in the case of loss of hearing rights was because the petitioner in their brief was able to trace a specific a specific safety concern with the loss of those hearing rights. And in this case, the petitioner has not done so. Although they have alleged a loss of hearing rights, and only on reply, but not in their initial brief, they have not traced that loss of hearing rights to a specific safety issue, but rather challenged generally the removal of all surveillance frequencies. And then, most importantly, in regard to contention admissibility, COPS has not submitted an admissible contention. COPS's contentions 2 and 3 are not within the scope of the proceeding. The Federal Register notice defined the criteria for the hearing. It had to relate to the license amendment at issue. The staff has shown that contention 2 is primarily based on misunderstandings in the changes to the license amendment request, or are related to issues, and contention 3 is related to issues clearly beyond its scope, such as the restart of songs. Regarding contention 1, COPS has alleged no legal deficiency in moving the surveillance frequencies from the technical specifications to licensee control documents. Moreover, no frequency is actually being changed. Licensees who wish to change the surveillance frequencies would have to follow the surveillance frequency control program. The Millstone case holds that both of these factors weigh against contention admissibility. And finally, to close with the words of Millstone, one could make a theoretical argument that safety might be diminished because these items in the future could be changed without the additional oversight and controls provided by a license amendment. But the general premise is insufficient by itself as a ground for intervention. For these reasons, COPS has not submitted an adequately supported contention that raises a material or genuine dispute with the application, and therefore the board should find the proposed contentions inadmissible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Liddell. Okay, well, thank you all for answering our questions and presenting your case. Where do we go from here? We will take this under advisement. We will go back and look at some of the citations you have given us here today, because I didn't have all those documents in front of me. I had some. And study the material and render a decision and write it up and issue it. And it'll probably be within sometime in January. We hope to rule within in January, late January, I suspect. But in any event, we will rule on the request for a hearing. And all we're focusing on there, as Mr. Lutz has pointed out, is not the merits of whether the contention wins or loses, but whether the contention meets the admissibility criteria. Also, we may also need to focus on the issues like timeliness and standing. And so, once again, I appreciate everyone's participation. I appreciate Mr. Lutz, you bearing with us through the technical difficulties out there. And Mr. Deutscher, I appreciate you trying to help us on that end of the deal. You get the nice trip to California. We all get stuck here in Washington D.C. But so be it. Are there anything else from Dr. Barada? No, I have nothing else. Anything else? Okay, then we'll consider this closed, and we will issue a ruling in due time. Thank you. This proceeding is closed.